There were candles on the table, 5 little candles, the kind you can find in any store, stuck on top of a 3-tiered cake that cost more than Valentina earned in a week. There were balloons tied to the chairs. Soft music was playing from the restaurant speakers. There were 2 children with crooked birthday hats, smeared with frosting, laughing with that laugh 5-year-olds have when they still believe the world was made to make them happy. And then the police came in, 4 of them, in vests, with radios, with that way of walking that freezes the air around them. The restaurant fell silent in less than 2 seconds. Conversations died. Forks stopped halfway between the plate and the mouth. Someone dropped a glass. The sound of glass against marble was the only thing heard in the entire room. Marcos Vidal stood up, not because he wanted to confront them, but because his body did what bodies do when fear comes before thought. "Mr. Vidal, you are under arrest for money laundering and financial fraud. You have the right to remain silent." Diego and Lucas stopped laughing. Diego looked at his dad. Lucas looked at the balloons, as if his 5-year-old mind still didn't know where to put what he was seeing. And then 2 things happened at the same time. 2 things that shouldn't exist at the same moment. 2 things that have no name when they happen together. The mother of those children, the woman who wore the surname Vidal embroidered on the heart of her credit card, the woman who had chosen that cake, those balloons, that table, remained seated, with her hands in her lap, with her back straight, with an expression on her face that was neither fear, nor surprise, nor pain. It was something else. Something Valentina recognized immediately, even though she had never seen it so close up before. It was relief. And the waitress, the woman who earned $9 an hour, the one who had no important last name or reserved seat in that room, the one who had served that table every Friday for 2 years, that woman dropped the tray. The sound was enormous, but Valentina wasn't hearing it anymore. Valentina was already running. She knelt between the 2 children. She hugged them both at the same time, one in each arm, pressing them against her chest with a strength that didn't come from her muscles, but from somewhere deeper, older, more real. Lucas buried his face in her neck. Diego grabbed her uniform with both fists and wouldn't let go. And Valentina, her arms full of other people's children, and her heart on the verge of breaking, felt something brush against her fingers from the pocket of her apron. A small notebook, with a black cover, filled with dates, filled with names, filled with secrets that no one in that restaurant, not the judge who had signed the arrest warrant, nor the police officers who were leading Marcos away in handcuffs between the tables and the birthday balloons, knew existed. No one except her and someone else. The same person who, at that moment, with her back straight and her hands still, watched as they took her husband away without moving a single muscle in her face. Hello, friends. Welcome to our story. Before we begin, please like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from: Mexico, Colombia, Venezuela, Argentina, the United States. We want to know. And at the end of the video, tell us what you learned from this story. Valentina Rios arrived in Miami on a Tuesday in February with a medium-sized suitcase, $200 in cash, and a laminated photo she kept in the left pocket of her pants. In the photo was a 2-year-old girl with her hair pulled back into 2 uneven buns, sitting on an older woman's lap, looking at the camera with that solemn seriousness babies have when something catches their attention. The girl's name was Sophia. The older woman was her grandmother. And Valentina was the one holding the camera because she already knew that the next day she would be on a plane and needed to take something with her that would fit in a pocket. Sophia was now 6 years old. Valentina had watched her grow up through video calls in pixelated squares that cut out every time the signal failed in Caracas. She had heard her first full words through a cheap headset. She had sung Happy Birthday twice from a kitchen in Miami, while her mother held the phone up to a small cake on the other side of the continent. She sent money every 2 weeks, $400 when she could, $300 when the month had been tough. Her mother received it and turned it into milk, school supplies, the shoes Sophia needed to start the year. Valentina knew this because they sent her photos. Photos of the shoes. Photos of the new notebook. Photos of Sophia asleep with her backpack on because she didn't want to take it off. Those photos were the reason Valentina arrived at the restaurant at 6 in the morning, even though her shift didn't start until 8. The reason she never missed a day in 3 years. The reason she put up with the difficult Fridays, the difficult customers, the difficult silences of a woman named Elena who looked at her as if she were part of the furniture. Don Fermin had given her the job without asking too many questions. He was a 71-year-old man with a white mustache and large hands that always smelled of coffee and old wood, because every morning he arrived before everyone else and wiped down the tables himself with a damp cloth, just as he had done since he opened the restaurant 30 years ago. When Valentina appeared at the door with her suitcase and her letter of recommendation, handwritten by a woman from Doral who could no longer afford to pay her, Don Fermin looked at her for 3 seconds and said, "Start tomorrow." He never asked her for her papers. He never asked her about Sophia. But every December 15th, he would give her an envelope with a little something extra inside and tell her it was for the girl, without waiting for a reply. Valentina knew every corner of La Terraza as well as she knew the palm of her hand. She knew that table 4 had a shorter leg and you had to put a folded napkin underneath it. She knew that the man who came on Thursdays always ordered the fish, but actually wanted the chicken, and you had to suggest it tactfully. She knew that the air conditioner in the left corner leaked when it rained hard, and you had to place a folded napkin in the frame. And she knew, with that kind of knowledge that doesn't come from books, but from being present when no one else is paying attention, everything she needed to know about Diego and Lucas Vidal. Diego always ordered the same pasta, without sauce, with Parmesan cheese on the side so he could sprinkle it on himself. He liked to do it himself. He liked to control that little thing. Lucas never finished his main course, but ate his entire dessert. He was afraid of the popping balloons. 2 months earlier, at a man's birthday party at the next table, one had exploded without warning, and Lucas had frozen, gone pale, his eyes filled with tears that wouldn't fall. Valentina had arrived before her mother, before her father, before anyone else. She had crouched down to his level and spoken softly to him until the color returned to his face. Elena had looked at her from across the table, not with gratitude, with something Valentina couldn't decipher that day, but eventually learned to recognize. It was the look of someone who had just realized that another person knows too much. That night, when she closed the restaurant and walked to the bus stop with tired feet and her apron folded under her arm, Valentina thought about that look. She thought about it the whole way. She thought about it while waiting for the bus under a flickering light. She thought about it while she took the little black notebook out of her pocket and wrote the date in the upper corner of a new page. She didn't know yet what she was documenting. She only knew that something at that table didn't smell right, and that things that don't smell right, sooner or later, rot. Elena Vidal always arrived first. That was the first thing Valentina had jotted down in the little notebook almost 2 years ago. The lady arrives before the gentleman. Always. Between 30 and 40 minutes early. At first, it didn't strike her as strange. Some people are punctual. Some people prefer to wait sitting down rather than waiting on the street. Valentina would bring her water with lemon, no ice, just as Elena requested, and would leave without making a sound. But Elena wasn't waiting alone. There was a man. Not always on the same day, not every week, but often enough for Valentina to recognize him. Dark suit, subtle tie. hair slicked back with the kind of precision that costs money. He arrived after Elena, greeted her with 2 kisses as if they'd known each other all their lives, and sat with his back to the entrance, in the only corner of the room not visible from the street. Valentina had served him coffee 3 times. All 3 times he'd ordered without looking at her, without saying thank you, with that calm nonchalance of someone so accustomed to being served that they no longer even register who is doing it. Elena, on the other hand, did look at her, always, with that gaze that measured, that calculated, that decided in a second exactly how much weight the person in front of her carried. And every time Valentina stepped away from that table, she felt that weight classified, filed away, discarded. The waitress, nameless, without a story, without importance. What Elena didn't know was that Valentina had a very good memory. She remembered dates. She remembered details. She remembered the yellow envelope that the man in the suit slipped under the napkin one October night. She had seen it because she was refilling the water, and no one refills water while looking someone in the eye. You look at the glass. And looking at the glass, Valentina saw Elena's hand close over that envelope with a speed that wasn't elegant. She was nervous. She wrote it down that night. Yellow envelope, quick hand. She put it in her purse before Mr. Marcos arrived. Marcos Vidal always arrived with his phone in hand. He greeted Elena with a kiss on the cheek, ruffled the children's hair with the same distracted gesture, and sat staring at the screen for another 5 minutes before folding it shut and asking what they were going to order. He was a good man, Valentina thought, not in the sense of being perfect, but in the sense that there was no malice in him. There was a sense of urgency. There was distance. There was that particular blindness of men who build empires, convinced that this is enough love. Elena, sitting across from him, smiled. It was a perfect smile, the kind of smile that doesn't come from the heart, but is practiced in front of the mirror until it comes naturally. Her hands rested calmly on the table. Her voice was warm when she spoke to him. Her eyes followed every one of Marcos's movements with an attentiveness that any husband would interpret as adoration. Valentina interpreted it as something else, like the attentiveness of someone who needs to know exactly what the other person knows. The man in the dark suit was named Rodrigo. Valentina knew this because one night he had dropped something under the table and she had picked it up before he could bend down. A business card, Rodrigo Salcedo, independent financial consultant. No company, no address, no website. Just a phone number and a name that Valentina wrote down in her little notebook that night, in letters larger than all the other notes. Because there was something about that name that stirred something inside her, something that hadn't taken shape yet, but that already carried weight. Marcos Vidal's arrest made the news that very night. Valentina saw it on her phone, sitting at the bus stop, still wearing her apron, her arms heavy from having carried Diego and Lucas for nearly 20 minutes, while the restaurant's dining room descended into chaos. Flashes, questions, and police officers asking everyone to leave calmly. Colombian businessmen arrested for money laundering. Authorities point to irregular transfers totaling over $11 million through shell companies linked to the Vidal construction firm. Valentina read the article 3 times. Then she opened the little notebook. She looked for a date. Thursday, January 19th. Exactly 8 months ago, Mr. Rodrigo arrived at 6:45. He asked only for water. He stayed for 40 minutes. Before leaving, he took out a thin folder and left it on the table. Mrs. Elena put it in her purse without opening it. When Mr. Marcos arrived, the purse was closed on the chair as if nothing had happened. Valentina turned another page. Date, Friday, March 3rd. The woman arrived alone. No children, no Mr. Marcos. She sat at the table in the back, not her usual one. She talked on the phone for almost half an hour. Softly. At one point, she said a sentence I heard because I was clearing the table next to her. "It has to be before Friday, Rodrigo. He's traveling on Thursday." The bus arrived and Valentina didn't get on. She stayed seated with the little notebook open on her lap and something cold moving slowly across her chest. He's traveling on Thursday. The fraudulent transfers, according to the phone note, had been made from the construction company's internal system at night, on dates when Marcos Vidal wasn't in Miami. Valentina knew this because on Fridays when he didn't come to the restaurant, Elena came anyway, sometimes with the kids, sometimes alone, sometimes with Rodrigo. She opened the search app on her phone. She typed the name. Rodrigo Salcedo, Miami, financial consultant, nothing. She tried a different search. Rodrigo Salcedo, Colombia, 3 results. 2 were different people. The third was a society column from a Bogotá newspaper from 15 years ago with a small, blurry photo of a wedding. Valentina zoomed in on the photo with 2 fingers. The bride was wearing a long dress and had her hair up. The image was old, pixelated, taken with a camera from that era. But the jawline was the same, the cheekbones were the same, the straight, almost defiant posture was exactly the same. The bride was Elena, and the groom was Rodrigo Salcedo. Valentina closed her phone. She opened it again. She looked at the photo once more, because her mind needed to confirm what her eyes had already understood from the very first second. Eleni hadn't been widowed. Eleni hadn't gotten divorced. There was no record of a separation, no annulment notice, nothing to interrupt that marriage from 15 years ago, which meant that when Elena married Marcos Vidal in a ceremony with 200 guests in Cartagena, with white flowers and a speech by the sea, she was already married to another man, and that other man had been sitting at a table in the restaurant for months, passing folders and envelopes under the napkins, silently building the perfect trap to destroy the husband who never knew he was the second. The next bus arrived 10 minutes later. Valentina got on. She sat by the window with the little notebook pressed against her chest as if someone might take it from her. Outside, Miami shone as always, indifferent, enormous, full of secrets that no one tells because no one sees them, except for the people who refill the water and never look you in the eye. Elena Vidal called her the next day, not at the restaurant, on her personal phone. A number Valentina had never given her, yet Elena had it anyway, because Elena had everything she needed before anyone ever offered it to her. Valentina was folding napkins when she felt the vibration. She saw the name on the screen, and something in her stomach tightened like a hand closing slowly. She answered, "Valentina, I need us to meet today, at 3, at the cafe on 8th Street. It wasn't a question. It was the voice of someone who has spent her whole life giving instructions and has never needed to turn them into questions." Valentina went, because not going was also an answer, and she wasn't ready to give answers yet. Elena arrived on time, wearing dark glasses and a cream-colored dress that didn't have a single wrinkle. She sat across from Valentina with the calm elegance of someone who doesn't feel she's in dangerous territory, but rather that she controls it. She ordered a coffee. She waited for the waitress to leave, and then she took off her sunglasses and looked Valentina straight in the eye. "I know you have a notebook." Valentina didn't answer. Her face didn't move. She had learned as a child not to show what she felt in moments when showing it meant losing. Elena continued. Her voice was low, almost kind. "Look, I understand you've been in this country for a while, working hard, that you have a daughter in Venezuela, that you send money every 2 weeks, that your immigration status isn't fully resolved yet." She paused. "Those things can get complicated very quickly, Valentina. One call to the wrong place, and suddenly the papers you're waiting for disappear into a drawer for another 2 years, or more." The coffee arrived. Elena thanked the waitress with a perfect smile. She waited for her to leave, but they can also be resolved very quickly with the right help. I know people. I can get Sophia here before the end of the year. She pronounced her daughter's name with surgical precision, like someone driving a pin exactly where it hurts the most. Valentina felt something hot rise in her throat. It wasn't fear. It was something older and darker than fear. It was the rage of someone who had been treated for years like a pawn on other people's chessboard. But rage alone is useless. Without strategy, rage is just noise. So Valentina nodded slowly, and she said the only thing that was true, and that at the same time gave nothing away. I need time to think. Elena put her glasses back on. She picked up her purse. She left a bill on the table for the coffee, even though Valentina hadn't ordered anything. You have until Sunday. She left without looking back. Valentina was left alone at that table, with the bill in front of her, her hands still in her lap, and her heart pounding in her chest with a force that wasn't visible from the outside. She thought of Sophia. She thought of the paperwork, of the 2 years she'd been waiting, of the lawyer who told her to be patient every 3 months, as if patience were a bank account that never ran dry. She thought of Elena saying her daughter's name, and then she thought of Lucas, of Diego, of how that morning, before the restaurant opened, Don Fermin's phone had rung, and it was a woman from social services asking if anyone knew the Vidal children, because their mother hadn't shown up to pick them up from school, and their father was in custody, and there was no emergency contact on file who could answer. Don Fermin had looked at Valentina. Valentina had closed her eyes for a second, and she had given her name. That afternoon, she picked up Diego and Lucas from school. Lucas fell asleep on the bus, leaning on her arm. Diego didn't speak the whole way. He just stared out the window with that expression that shouldn't exist on the face of a 5-year-old. At some point, without asking, he took her hand, and Valentina realized that Sunday was too late. She had to act sooner. That night, Valentina didn't sleep, not because she couldn't, but because every time she closed her eyes, the same image appeared. Elena saying Sophia's name, with that calmness, with that precision, like someone wielding a scalpel who knows exactly where to cut. She got up at 2 a.m. and sat on the edge of the bed, with the little notebook on her lap and the phone in her hand. She looked for the last photo her mother had sent her. Sophia in the courtyard, wearing a yellow dress, staring at something outside the frame, with a serious concentration that reminded her of herself as a child. Valentina was 9 years old when her mother taught her something that wasn't in any book. They were in Caracas, in the small kitchen of their apartment, and outside there was an argument between neighbors that drifted up through the windows. Her mother was peeling potatoes without rushing and said to her, without looking up, "Fear is legitimate, my dear, but if you let it control you, you've already lost." Valentina had carried that phrase for 28 years, the way one carries a tool, without showing it off, but always at the ready. Elena was counting on fear. She had built her entire plan on it, the paperwork, the 2-year wait, the name Sophia spoken aloud like a key that unlocks a door one thought was closed. But Elena had made a mistake. She had given her until Sunday, and Sunday hadn't arrived yet. Valentina opened the little notebook to the first page. She read every entry from the beginning, slowly, like someone studying a map before entering unknown territory. The dates, the times, the envelopes, the scattered phrases she had picked up from the air without yet knowing what they were for. Now she knew. At 3 a.m, she wrote a message. Short, no frills. "Don Fermin, I need to talk to you tomorrow before the restaurant opens. It's important." The old man replied in less than a minute, as if he hadn't been sleeping either. "I'll be here at 6. There's coffee." Valentina set her phone down on the table and stared at the ceiling for a moment. If this story is touching your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Every week we bring you stories like this, real stories of women who lost everything and found their way back. Click subscribe so you don't miss a single one. Don Fermin listened to her without interrupting. Valentina spoke for 40 minutes. She told him everything: the dates, the envelopes, the wedding photo in Bogota, the threat at the cafe on 8th Street, the name Sophia spoken as a warning. Don Fermin listened with both hands wrapped around his coffee cup, looking at her with those small, dark eyes that had seen too much to be easily frightened. When she finished, the old man was silent for a moment. Then he said something Valentina hadn't expected. "Mr. Marcos's lawyer. His name is Andres Molina. I know him. We used to play dominoes together years ago. He's an upright man." He paused. "I'll call him today." Valentina looked at him. "The little notebook," said Don Fermin. "Leave it with me for now. No one will find it here." Valentina took the little notebook out of her apron pocket. She placed it on the table between them, and for the first time in many days she felt that the weight she had been carrying alone had just been split in two. Sunday came anyway. Valentina was serving the table in the back when she saw Eleanor walk in. No sunglasses this time. With that open, calm expression she wore when she wanted to be seen as a victim. Behind her came a man in a suit whom Valentina didn't recognize, and behind the man, an officer with a visible badge on his belt. Don Fermin came out of the kitchen drying his hands. Valentina looked at him. He shook his head slowly, just once, a small shake, as if to say, "Stay still." Elena addressed the officer in a soft, measured voice, the voice she reserved for people who might be useful to her. "It's her, the restaurant employee." The officer approached Valentina with the weary demeanor of someone going through the motions. "Miss Rios, there's a report of misappropriation of private documents belonging to the Vidal family. I need you to come with me." The entire dining room fell silent. The conversations, the forks, the air. Valentina felt the floor shift slightly beneath her feet, not from fear, from something more like the sensation of falling slowly, knowing you're going to fall, yet unable to do anything about it. She looked at Don Fermin. The old man's jaw was clenched, but his eyes were calm. He nodded once more, so slightly that only Valentina saw it. "The little notebook is safe." Valentina took off her apron. She folded it carefully over the counter, just as she did every night when her shift ended. She left it there, and she walked out with her back straight and her hands still in front of the officer, without looking at Elena. But Elena looked at her, with that smile of someone who has just won a game they've been playing for months. At the station, Valentina waited 4 hours on a plastic chair before anyone explained what was happening. Elena's complaint included not only the accusation of document theft, but also a report to immigration pointing out irregularities in her immigration process. 4 hours sitting there, no phone, no news, not knowing if Don Fermin had managed to contact the lawyer, not knowing where Diego and Lucas were, not knowing anything, just the noise of the station. And the laminated photo of Sophia she carried in her pocket, which she squeezed with her fingers once without taking it out, just to confirm it was still there. What Valentina didn't know at that moment was that 40 minutes away, in an office downtown, Don Fermin was sitting across from Dr. Andres Molina with an untouched cup of coffee and the little black-covered notebook on the desk between them. And that Molina, after reading the first page, had set his own coffee aside and had said something in a low voice. Something Don Fermin repeated that night when he was finally able to speak to Valentina on the phone. With her sitting on the sidewalk outside the station in her tight shoes, exhaustion weighing on her bones. "He says this is enough, sweetheart. He says this is enough." The preliminary hearing was on Wednesday. Valentina arrived in a dark blue dress, the only one she owned besides her uniform. She had pulled her hair back into her usual braid. Her shoes were clean, her hands were cold, and her stomach was empty because she hadn't been able to eat anything that morning. Don Fermin was waiting for her at the courthouse entrance with his usual hat and an expression that tried to be reassuring and almost succeeded. Inside, Dr. Molina greeted them with the contained energy of someone who has slept little, but thinks clearly. He shook Valentina's hand firmly and looked her straight in the eyes. "You did something very valuable. Now let me do my job." The room smelled of old paper and air conditioning. Marcos Vidal entered in handcuffs, his suit wrinkled at the shoulders, with that look of someone who has spent days processing things that don't fit into a single thought. When he saw Valentina, he paused for a second. Just a second, and he nodded with a silent gravity that needed no words. Elena arrived later, perfect, accompanied by 2 lawyers and Rodrigo Salcedo, who sat in the second row with his usual ease. Dark suit, subtle tie, straight back. Valentina looked at him from across the room. And for the first time, Rodrigo looked at her, not with hostility, with something more like the curiosity of someone who has just noticed that a piece on the board they thought was fixed has moved on its own. The prosecutor presented the evidence against Marcos, the transfers, the IP logs, the timestamps, everything pointing in the same direction. Then Molina stood up. "Your Honor, the defense presents new evidence." He opened the folder on the table. First, the little notebook, the photocopied pages, each entry dated and timed, arranged chronologically. Then the photos from Valentina's cell phone, blurry but clear where it mattered. Elena, Rodrigo, the yellow envelope passing from hand to hand. And finally, printed on a single sheet, the photo of the society column from the Bogotá newspaper. Elena Restrepo and Rodrigo Salcedo. Married for 15 years. No record of divorce, no annulment, no document to sever that legal bond that continued to exist in silence while Elena built another life on top of it. The prosecutor frowned and called for a recess. Valentina heard Elena whispering something in her lawyer's ear with a speed that was no longer elegant. It was urgent, and the urgency in Elena looked exactly like fear in anyone else. Rodrigo, in the second row, didn't move, but something in his face changed. The confidence of someone who has been executing a perfect plan for months and has just heard the sound of the first crack. Valentina saw it all from her chair, her hands still on her lap and her heart beating hard but steady, like an engine that knows it still has a long way to go. Don Fermin, at her side, placed a large, calloused hand over hers. He said nothing. It wasn't necessary. The recess lasted 20 minutes. When the judge sat back down, the prosecutor had 3 new documents on his desk that Molina's team had submitted during the recess. Marriage records, notarized certificates. A report from the Bogotá Civil Registry confirming what the photo had already revealed. Elena Restrepo had been legally married to Rodrigo Salcedo for 15 years. Which meant that her marriage to Marcos Vidal did not exist in the eyes of the law. Which meant that Marcos had never been her husband. He had been her cover. The silence that followed was unlike any of the silences before. It was the silence of an entire courtroom processing something at the same time. The prosecutor was processing it. The judge was processing it. Elena's 2 lawyers were processing it, staring at their papers without reading a word. Marcos Vidal was processing it, looking at Elena with an expression that wasn't anger. It was something more like seeing for the first time a room you've lived in for years and realizing it never had windows. Elena didn't look at Marcos. She looked at Valentina. And Valentina held her gaze without looking away, without triumph, without anger. With that particular calm of someone who did the right thing and doesn't need to celebrate it. The judge spoke for several minutes. Valentina heard the words as if from a distance. Charges against Marcos Vidal dropped. Immediate investigation against Elena Restrepo and Rodrigo Salcedo for fraud, bigamy, and conspiracy. Arrest warrant. Rodrigo stood up before the bailiff reached him. He didn't run. He didn't protest. He just buttoned his jacket with that automatic gesture of someone who needs to do something with their hands when everything else has fallen apart. Elena was the last to stand up. She did so slowly, with that studied dignity that didn't abandon her even in that moment. But when she passed in front of the defense table, her eyes met Valentina's once again. This time, there was no calculation in that gaze. There was no scalpel, no strategy, just the expression of someone who had underestimated the wrong person. Outside the courthouse, the Miami sun beat down on the sidewalk with that intensity that asks for no permission. Marcos Vidal approached Valentina with red eyes and his hands free for the first time in days. He couldn't say anything for a moment. He just looked at her like someone trying to find the right words in a language they're still learning. Finally, he said the only thing that was true. "You protected my children when I couldn't, and you protected my name without anyone asking you to." Valentina nodded. Don Fermin, standing to one side, wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and then looked away as if he were examining something very interesting in the distance. 3 months later, Sofia Rios landed in Miami on a Thursday afternoon with a small backpack and her hair in 2 uneven little buns. She walked down the arrivals hall with that solemn seriousness children have when something important is happening and they know it. Valentina was waiting for her on the other side. When Sofia saw her, she ran, and Valentina knelt on the airport floor, not caring about anything else, and welcomed her with open arms and a heart full of everything she hadn't been able to tell her in 2 years of pixelated squares and dropped calls. Diego and Lucas Vidal started the school year with a new girl in the neighborhood who spoke just like Valentina and taught them to swear in Venezuelan slang, which they repeated at the table until Valentina gave them that look, and they stopped immediately. Valentina was still working at La Terraza, but now she had her papers. Now she had a room of her own. Now she had Sofia sleeping in the bed next to hers every night, and every Friday, when Table 5 filled with laughter and dishes and a life that had survived everything that tried to destroy it, Valentina would approach with the water pitcher and pour in silence. Just like O2 always, with the difference that now, when Marcos Vidal looked up, he thanked her by looking her in the eyes. And that, after all, was enough. It was everything. If this story touched your heart, like this video right now, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our stories. Tell us in the comments, where are you watching from, and what part touched you the most? I read every comment. See you in the next video.